Hi, this is a conversation with John Hasnas, who is the author of Trapped, When Acting Ethically is Against the Law. John, it must be tough to be between a stone and a hard place, isn't it?
Yeah, it's tough to be between a rock and a hard place. The book is designed to suggest that business people, ethical business people, often find themselves in exactly that situation. And the rock is the law and the risk of prosecution. And the hard place is their duty to treat their employees properly and to do their ethical duty towards their employees who might be suspected of wrongdoing.
Is there a recipe for coming out of that situation?
Well, one reason why I wrote the book is because it's not clear exactly what should be done. I'll give you some background so that it makes sense. Business people who are doing their job correctly, they have certain obligations to their employees to treat them fairly. If they make representations or promises to their employees about how they'll be treated, about whether they'll keep information confidential, you've got an ethical duty to honor your promise. You have a duty to respect your employees' privacy at home to some extent. People have a right to privacy. When there are controversies in the workplace, you've got a duty to treat the employees fairly in the sense that people get to present their side of the story. And if they're accused of wrongdoing, they should have a chance to explain. They should have procedural justice. So there's a lot of things that go along with treating your employees in a fair and neutral manner when you're running a business. The problem comes when, and this is a problem that's associated with prosecution in the United States. So it has to do with the policy of the Department of Justice of the United States. If the Department of Justice suspects an employee of wrongdoing, it can threaten the corporation that he works for or she works for with prosecution. And the only way for the corporation to avoid indictment and prosecution, which can be enough to end a corporation or impose massive costs on it, is for the corporation to cooperate with the Department of Justice in its investigation. And for reasons that perhaps are too technical to go into, what that requires a corporation to do is assume that their own employees are guilty and help the prosecution, help the government prosecute the individuals. They can't afford to give the individuals the presumption of innocence. They often can't afford to give the individuals a fair hearing. If they've promised to keep information confidential with the employees, they have a duty to turn it over to the government. They end up having to break their promise. So business people find themselves in a situation where, to protect their company from the legal ramifications of a prosecution, they have to treat their employees badly or unfairly. The situation is so acute in the United States that there's a phrase that's used by corporate counsel and also by criminal defense attorneys. And what they say is the law in the United States, the law of white-collar crime, requires corporate counsel, requires corporations to throw their employees under the bus whenever they're under suspicion. So in a sense, the problem is that you put your company at legal risk by giving your employees the benefit of the doubt and helping them defend themselves.
What effect does this has on trust, for example?
Yeah, it's a great question, and this is one of the reasons why this is such an important issue. My colleagues in business school who study organizational behavior have done a lot of research. We have 30 years of research about what will actually reduce wrongdoing by employees in the workplace. There's a lot known about this. And most of it shows that if you can develop trust between the employee and the management, if you can make the employees feel like their values are shared by the management, if management always is honest and keeps its word, if management treats employees fairly, then the employees react to that by helping the management keep an ethical workplace. They're more likely to inform the management about any wrongdoing that's going on. They take wrongdoing by others as an affront to themselves and not just to the company. And so this approach is highly effective in reducing wrongdoing by employees. The problem is it's based on trust. The approach that the government is incentivizing businesses to adopt is one where it's highly punitive. What you have to do is you have to monitor your employees, look over their shoulders, punish harshly if anything goes wrong. It's a way of trying to reduce wrongdoing that undermines trust. And the research that I mentioned shows that it's much less effective. So the actual research shows if you adopt one of these top-down command and control compliance programs, you can reduce wrongdoing a little bit. So it's not ineffective. You can reduce wrongdoing a little bit. But if you adopt the trust-based organizational justice approach, you can reduce wrongdoing by employees a great deal. It's much more effective. And the problem right now is that the policy of the Department of Justice is forcing companies to adopt a less effective approach. It's not reducing wrongdoing as much as it could because it's undermining the trust between the employees and the management.
Besides trust, what other values are at stake?
It's just the values of fair dealing, honesty. If you promise confidentiality, you have to keep it. And if keeping your promise means what the government wants you to do is reveal any information you have to it, breach confidentiality. Well, if you do that, you protect yourself from legal indictment, but you have to break your word. So just the value of honesty is at stake. Fair dealing in the sense of we owe each other goodwill. We should presume other people are innocent or well-meaning until we have evidence to show that they're not. So the presumption of innocence is, in some sense, a value. But businesses are now in a position where they have to presume their employees are guilty as soon as the government asks for an investigation. And you can't give the presumption of innocence anymore. If you give employees a chance to try to defend themselves, that means that the Department of Justice considers the company as not cooperating. And if you're not cooperating, you're more likely to be indicted. So just the values of honesty, fair dealing, good faith, and sort of goodwill between people is at risk when you're pressured to treat your employees as potential wrongdoers and potential enemies.
Are white-collar crimes different from other type of crimes?
Yeah. Yes. White-collar crime is a poorly defined term, but I'll give you the ballpark. Traditional crimes are crimes in which one party has caused harm to another. A direct assault, a murder, theft. One person has imposed harm on the other, and they can be punished for that because it's a crime. There are some forms of crime which are like white-collar crime. For instance, fraud is if I make a misrepresentation that causes you to rely on my word and suffer a loss. That's traditional crime too. But what we usually call white-collar crime in the United States is the criminal law that's prosecuted by the federal government. And everything I just described as traditional criminal law, that's prosecuted by the states. Well, the federal government doesn't go after the same things. So the federal government defines fraud as anything that would be any scheme or artifice to defraud. So any unfair dealing, anything that would be deceptive or ethically questionable, that's enough to be a fraud at the federal level. Also, any violation of regulations designed to regulate the marketplace, that would be a federal violation. So federal criminal law or white-collar crime the white-collar criminal law is an attempt to enforce honest dealing across the board in the marketplace. And it will reach well beyond what would be traditionally crime. There doesn't have to be any actual harm. It just is any kind of dishonest dealing, whether it causes harm or not. It's broader than traditional criminal law.
John, who is the book aimed to? Where is the target? Who should read it?
That's an interesting question. The book was written for a symposium on white-collar crime. And I think it has more than one audience. One audience that this book is targeted to is the business consulting community, my colleagues go out and tell businesses how they can generate trust, how they can have a more just procedural justice in the organization, how their organization can perform better. The problem is my colleagues don't know about the law, and they don't know that by encouraging businesses to engage in this trust-based approach, they're subjecting them to legal risk if there's ever an investigation. So to some extent, I want my colleagues to realize they should consider the legal element when they're giving advice. On the other hand, my other colleagues that teach business ethics, they usually assume that the law and ethics pull in the same direction, that if the law requires something, then it's right. And this is an example of where the law could be incentivizing business people to behave in ways that are wrong. We shouldn't be breaking our word. We shouldn't be treating people with, presuming them guilty. So this is to let the ethicists know you can't just rely on the law and assume that it's going to always be correct. Maybe everybody needs to know that there are cases in which the law and ethics pull in opposite directions, and you can't merely rely on the law. Well, two things. You can't rely on the law to be sure that if you abide by it, you're doing the right thing. And the other thing is, you can't rely on your ethical intuitions to guide you and think that you can't get in legal trouble then. If you're doing what you think is right, there are cases in which you'll be in legal trouble. People should be aware of that.
John, let's assume that we are on TV and someone asks you, could you summarize the book in 30 seconds? Can you?
In 30 seconds? Okay. If you're a business person who's always done the right thing and you have a strong sense of ethics and you want to continue in business successfully, learn about the law. Your ethical intuitions are not a reliable guide for when you'll be in legal trouble. The law can sometimes put you in a position in which, if you just go on what you think is ethically correct, you'll end up in legal trouble. So watch out.
Thank you very much, John, for sharing these ideas with us. And thank you too.
Thank you.